This role offers new dimensions, or well, you've got that sort of horror film sort of side of your persona, and then you've got the touching, meaningful. I mean, how much do you get to bring the two together here?
It's great.
It's
I
true,
mean,
actually.
this show kind of brings it all together. It's like every genre in one, which for me is so much fun. I mean, I think anytime as an actor you get to be funny and heartfelt and action-oriented, and there's so many different things in one, which is kind of what I'm always looking for. So you can kind of bring all your tools from the toolbox to play, and it makes it a lot more interesting.
So you had all this attention on you with Cloverfield Lane. You seem to be living in the land of conspiracy. Is there something that they see in you, or is that something that you find yourself intrigued by that leads you to engage?
I don't know. I think I tend to seek out roles where the character is just really active and is constantly thinking and constantly trying to accomplish something and do something and become something. And I don't like to be passive and just sort of playing characters who are kind of sitting around or waiting for a phone call from their husband or whatever. So, which is a lot of roles for women, is a lot of like sitting on the phone while the guy goes off and does a lot of exciting stuff. So I think that's part of it, is I just am really drawn to roles where the characters are out there doing things and trying to figure something out and make something happen.
And Aaron, I don't want to keep you out of the discussion, so what do you have to add to the idea of love of conspiracy?
Yeah, I think it's the nice thing about conspiracy, in any kind of genre, or in books and in television and film, is that there, like Mary said, there's constantly something to strive for and something to overcome, which I think is, especially in the TV series, you need a story that can play out, and a story that can hopefully sustain over a season and multiple seasons. So I think that kind of, I always go back to the first season. I personally, I think that first season of Homeland, when you kind of didn't know whether or not he was a terrorist, it was some of the most exciting television I've ever seen. So I think the longer that you can play out these conspiratorial ideas, the better it is for, hopefully a long run of a show.
I told Tony this as someone who worked for the federal government and lived in D.C. This answers a lot of questions
Good.
about
Now
my
you know.
superiors.
Right?
Fantastic.
But when you first got that script and you read Bug's brain, what was your reaction?
I thought it was a little gross. So I have to kind of I know I have to read the scripts, but I get a little grossed out sometimes and it's just action lines describing it. I'm like, that's so disgusting. But yeah, that was my initial reaction. But.
I think I was just so blown away. I didn't expect this from the creators of The Good Wife.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what was so exciting to me, was that I just was like, this is so different for them and so risky, because it's so strange and so out there. And I think it really made me excited to work for them, because they're coming up with something so odd and unique and unexpected. And I think I was like, oh yeah, these are the kind of people I want to work for.
Also, I think that CBS is taking a chance.
Yeah.
Kind of off center for them. They've been so successful, and just to see that they're branching out, I think is really exciting to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I found really interesting, at least about the pilot that we got to watch, was I think especially Aaron, this relates to your character. There's been so much vilification of Republicans of any form on the part of the media, and so I was wondering about playing a role that, coming from a satirical perspective that seems to probably be somewhat left-leaning, that kind of sort of humanizes that, and how you feel about the general polarity of the state that the country is in.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this, hopefully, is that it's not necessarily a political statement from a liberal media or a liberal, creative world against conservative or Republicans. That we are showing how extremism can polarize the country. I think if that's a political statement, I think that's the statement. But I don't know, playing a guy who's a Republican, and I tell my friends I'm kind of this asshole Republican chief of staff, and they roll their eyes. But at the same time, he's a bit of a Republican that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. He's very idealistic. Somebody asked me who his favorite president would be, and I said Teddy Roosevelt, because I think this guy just really believes, and it's a very old school idea that in this country, if you work hard, if you do the right thing, if you keep your head down, your country should reward you for that. And I think that's the kind of the core of the Republican that I'm playing in the show. And it's something that we've gotten away from a little bit. And so I've actually, you know, a couple people that I've talked to that have seen the pilot, they've said that, you know, it's great to see that perspective of this. And I think that that's a really great thing that they're doing. And hopefully, you know, it does play out, because, you know, we just live in a crazy political climate that, you know, the stuff that you watch on television is just, you know, you can go crawl in a hole if you watch it for too long. So I think they're doing it a really good job of showing all sides of what this is.
And do you guys think it's feasible to have a romantic spark between two characters that are coming from opposite poles of the political climate? Or?
Well, the show's definitely, you know, experimenting with that, and it plays out in different ways. And you know,
what
there's
Paul Abdul say though? 2 steps forward, 2
Right.
steps back.
It almost seems like messing up.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I think the show, you know, it like he was saying, it's really talking a lot about extremism and how almost people are being united for their hatred for each other. With the, you know, I mean, that's ultimately how people are coming together. You know, we both can agree that we have nothing in common and hate one another and cannot have any sort of discussion. And I think that our two characters sort of represent these two very idealistic, hopeful people who I think hopefully represent the best of their respective parties. You know, people who just want to be able to live side by side and have reasonable conversations and have a debate and maybe actually get somewhere at the end of the day. I think that's kind of what we're hoping to show.
You were in Mercy Street. Now that's the ultimate conflict between the Republicans and other.
Yeah. I know.
Was there any insights that you got from working in Mercy? I mean, I found it fascinating, you know, because it really dealt with a lot of those issues.
It does, and I think, you know,
about parasites.
Right, yeah. I mean, they are sort of united in that sense that I think Mercy Street, certainly we weren't trying to, you know, sympathize with the other side or anything like that, but I think humanizing both sides was one of the goals of that show, and showing it from the perspective of the time, which is these were people who believed these things. They weren't just, you know, sort of villains and heroes. And so I think that was kind of the discussion of that show, and I think, you know, this one is obviously totally very different and a completely different story, but I think that same discussion sort of pervades in this as well.
So Elizabeth, I guess my thing is, it's been commented before about, you know, all the projects that you've done that have been, you know, in that sci-fi realm. In a lot of those projects, I feel that you've had the difficult task of playing like the every woman, and that's a very tricky, you know, character to play. It's very easy to make it boring. So can you talk about, you know, how you're able to, you know, what's your approach in still trying to make that character accessible for the audience? Because a lot of times you're acting as the audience's guide through a lot of these fantastical elements.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to really, I used to not want to play those kind of characters when I first started acting. I really wanted to be very character-y and always have like a role that was really different from myself, and that I could add a weird accent or a limp or something, and like, you know, make it like real.
Checking for the limp character.
Real acting, I thought. So, like probably a few years ago is when I kind of started playing more roles, like protagonist roles, and trying to figure out how to make that interesting. And I think I kind of shifted my ideas on kind of what acting is to me, which is I bring a lot more of myself to it than I used to, and I realized that if I'm bringing all of myself to something, then, you know, unless I think very little of myself, which is I think I have nothing to bring to the table, then it's going to be interesting, because as just a human being, we all have so many different sides of our personality and things that, you know, reactions that we're capable of having emotionally in any given moment. So I feel like it opens it up so much more, instead of thinking in this box of like, well, this character would only react in this way. I think, well, if it were me, I could react in any number of ways and anything could happen. And it makes it really kind of exciting for me in that way, if I think of myself being in the situation that the character's in.
So what's interesting about both of you, while things could develop romantically, what I also see is there's a chance you might become allies as you kind of put 2 and 2 together as to what's going on. Any of that possible that might happen?
Well, again, I think that's what's kind of interesting about the show, is that as it goes, you kind of find the people that are living in this kind of, you can say the moderate realm in the middle, but it's also kind of like the people living in reality in the middle of all of this happening kind of start to look and say, hey, I might need to work with you a little bit on this, no matter what, what the party line is. But yeah, I mean, I think again that's a really interesting thing that can go forward. And what Mary was saying too is that hopefully these two people do represent good sides of each of this coin, and if they can kind of find that in each other and work, that's a good thing. And I think that's something we need more of in the real world.
2 questions. First, how sick of you are that song playing over and over again? And
That's a good point.
it was like, wow, they're playing that song to death. 2, going back to what you said, Aaron, like, were you kind of shocked at the low of ick factor they were going on network TV? Because when I saw that brain come out, I was like, wow.
Yeah, I guess to both questions.
You're traumatized, aren't you?
Yeah, the song. But it's one of those things that we did hear it a little bit on set, right?
It's not every time we hear it though. Now we all get it in our heads so much. We're just singing it all the time.
And actually,
than
So you're like
hearing it.
affected.
Completely, all of us.
Twisted brain.
But what was nice though is we heard it so much, and then they just put out a new trailer with the song, and I was like, "Oh, this is so great!"
I know, I'm excited about it.
So that was good too. So.
Torture us.
Yeah, exactly. And the ick factor, there's a bit of an ick factor. Actually, filming, I haven't had to really. Well, that's not true. But I haven't had to deal with the brains coming out. We've had to deal with some other nasty stuff, but we'll save that. But reading it is the thing that I just can't do it.
So Mary, you were baptized by fire in
Yes.
the pilot, and even on the
Oh yeah.
trailer. So there's no spoilers there.
You got the ick.
Everybody saw you.
Oh,
at the
yeah.
end.
All over
Well,
you.
my first scene that we shot for the show, my first day, was in the ambulance.
That's
That
so
that
cool.
scene. That was the very first scene. So I really was
Jumped
baptized
out
by
of the
fire.
very
It was first scene. I hadn't even met everybody yet. I was just like,
Well, that
"Hi,
would have
nice
been a
to
good
meet you."
time to meet Aaron then.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hey, what's
Right.
up? Oh, you have something on your face.
And I had no idea how much it was going to be, because it wasn't, you never know with those things. It could just be a little trickle, a little something, and it was like Carrie and like,
So
yeah,
did
it was
you
intense.
did you find playing Frank? And don't ask me to pronounce
Abigail?
Abagnale as some way or another inspiring you, or in giving you some sort of a sense of how I can use deceptive techniques to apply?
Absolutely. I mean,
And that is what a great role. I mean, I saw the show on Broadway, so
yeah, that was kind of. I learned a lot from that particular project. I worked on it for a long time. I actually got to know Frank really well.
I got to meet him as well.
And he's just like one of them. He's honestly, he's a good-looking guy, but he's kind of unassuming, except for the fact that I remember the first time I met him, he was in a room full of. It was at a reading of the show we were doing around. There's probably 100 people in the room, and honestly, when you looked across the room, it looked like he was 10 feet tall. Like he just has this kind of thing about him, and that I think. It was interesting working on that and then thinking about being an actor and kind of like the belief that you need to have in yourself and what you were saying about bringing to yourself to something, and just kind of I was really struck always by his stillness and kind of how he would command everything. And that's just kind of a random thing that I have thought about a lot being an actor since then, that you can kind of just be yourself and be there and you're enough. That's that's another thing from my psychiatrist catch. You're enough. But I did learn that from Frank, and and that's how he deceived people, and that's how he pulled these tricks. Is that he just completely believed in what he was doing, and therefore everyone else did too. And so I think that's something that is good for acting and politics in a terrible way. But yeah.
In such a genre-bending show, how did you guys as actors agree on sort of a cohesive style?
Last question.
I don't know.
We just kind of fell into it.
Yeah, I think that was something we all worked on every take, every
Yeah.
day, and we still do.
Yeah.
We don't because now obviously we've seen the pilot, but for a couple months we were doing this kind of in a vacuum. You don't know what it is, so I think we were working
We just
on.
we would just had a lot of trust
Yeah.
in Robert and Michelle, and that if they felt like it was working, then we must be doing something right. And I feel like I had a sense from reading it of what they wanted, but ultimately really didn't know how it was all going to come together with all the characters and all the storylines and all the genres. But we just kind of knew it was going to work. I think we just kind of had.
And I think one thing that we did too is we've never been sending the material up. We've never been making it a camp thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something that was kind of that we all agreed upon. And we were
yeah.
all within this realm taking it as realistic as possible. Just that these circumstances are happening in the real world, you know. But we really just trusted them to tell us more or less whatever. Yeah.
Well, the dialogue was so snappy too.
Yes.
The dialogue's amazing. It really
And-
is so well written.
And they reference a lot on sets, you know, like old 1940s movies and a lot of that kind of, so you very quickly started to understand what they were,
Yeah.
the throwback kind of feeling they were going for.
Yeah, a little Rosalind Russell.
Exactly,
character.
that-
Yeah, I
name
mean,
has
you know,
been-
they've said The West Wing, but they also talk about His Girl Friday, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's all these throwback things, so it's great.
Yeah, so